Welcome to the Cuda Photography Podcast, a podcast that explores nature and wildlife photography in your own backyard and throughout the United States. Okay, welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, episode 9, I'm going to explore the concept of photographing captive animals and how this can benefit animals as well as our own photography. In order to explore this topic fully, I want to first examine 3 categories of captive photography and use these 3 categories with several locations here in North Carolina as examples to support each category. Your understanding of captive animal photography is about to get a whole lot bigger. Years ago, when I first tapped into these resources, my view was radically changed. So, there are primarily 3 different categories of captive wildlife photography. And they're done in 3 different types of locations. The first is a rehabilitation center, or is commonly referred to as a rehab center. The second is a breeding center. And the third are quality zoos. And I want to just briefly mention number 3, quality zoos. Okay, when I say quality, I mean these are zoos that they have large areas for the animals to literally to roam in. They're not necessarily caged in tightly. I personally have a problem with leaving animals in cages too long. I think it's I just think it's unfair to the animal and probably a bit selfish of us. But there are some quality zoos out there. So let's leave that there for now, because I know, some of you listening to this are like, oh, he photographs at zoos, those terrible poor animals and all this. Let me just tell you, I don't know how it is where you live, but I'm going to actually show you or tell you about a zoo that is absolutely fabulous. But before we do all that, let's get into the first type of category. And this is a rehab center. In North Carolina, the most famous, or probably I don't know if famous is the right word, but the best rehab center in my opinion is the Carolina Raptor Center. They're located in Huntersville, North Carolina. They rehabilitate approximately 1,000 raptors a year. They only handle raptors, so any kind of bird like a hawk or eagle or vulture, so on and so forth. The patients are brought in due to gunshot wounds, being hit by cars, and just regular sicknesses that affect birds. Some raptors they can't rehabilitate due to amputations or human imprinting. Now, human imprinting, that just simply means that someone had them prior to being brought to the Raptor Center, and what happened was they actually got so used to that human that they took on human characteristics. Some of them make sounds only a human would make. They have a high trust level of humans, and that's not necessarily a good thing in the wild. So they cannot be released into the wild. They are imprinted, and those animals serve as ambassadors, if you will, for the Raptor Center. They use them when they go talk to children in schools, any kind of special events, and so on. So they still serve a great purpose, even though they can't be released into the wild. So I just want to kind of explain that imprinting thing, because I didn't understand what that meant at first. The raptors that can be released are the ones who cannot become part of the public relations department I just shared. The raptors that are imprinted or have some of the raptors might have an amputated wing. They go to the, quote, so our public relations department. And they can be used again at schools or shared with other rehab centers for the same purposes. And this is the kind of place I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a highly beneficial place where captive raptors are held. This is not a place where they're mistreated. This is not a place where their main goal is to take in a lot of money from visitors, although they do have a small walking trail there with various raptors along it that you can see in cages and so on. You have to understand that the ones that are actually in the cages, they're there because they literally could not be released into the wild. they would have died. So, their view is better to have a wounded raptor, there that can kind of be their spokesman, if you will. And I think that's a good thing. I really do. I think that this is the perfect example of how a captive bird can be used to educate people and be helpful to photographers. So, how does this help you, right? How does this help photographers? Well, a place like this, and it's not just here that they have these. I'm using this as an example. They have them in Europe. They have them various places in the United States. This is, I think, I could be wrong, but I think this is the biggest rehab center in the southeast of the United States, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But they have an event they hold 3 times a year called Photo Wild. And what this event is, it's a special event just for photographers. If you're an advanced amateur or an amateur or a pro, it doesn't really matter. You pay them money. It's kind of a benefit event. You pay them $100 and you come in there for a couple days and you shoot, a couple mornings. I think it's 8 hours total of shooting. You come in there, you shoot. Well, let me just go through what the schedule would look like so you can get an idea of what this might be like in your area. I generally will arrive there somewhere around 7:30. They have a small breakfast set up there for you. They have some, I don't know, they've got like cereal and coffee and, donuts and things like that. And then you'll begin shooting somewhere around 8 o'clock. They'll bring out raptors. And they usually have about, I can't remember exactly, I think it's maybe 4 different raptors out at one time in various areas. And they have these areas actually set up they're actually little setup photography areas. And they have, more realistic perches for them, realistic backgrounds. But it's a great opportunity to see these birds close up and in decent lighting and be able to photograph them. Again, I've seen these. This is not just happening here in North Carolina. There's other places out there doing exactly the same thing. So take a look just do a quick search on Google and just take a look and see what's out there. I think you'd be surprised. I had no idea until I started Googling this several years ago that these places even existed. But awesome place, awesome people, and a great place to get great photographs. What kind of gear do I use going to an event like this? Well, I take both my cameras. I take my EOS 7D. I take my EOS 1D Mark II. I usually will either borrow a 70 to 200 f4L lens. It's a great lens for this event. I'll take my flash bracket. I'll take my flash. Lots of CF cards and a tripod. Now, the 2 things I want to really bring home to you, if you go to this event or an event like this, is you need a flash and a tripod. Now, why is that? Well, early in the morning, you're in a wooded area, very low shutter speeds. We're talking 1/100th of a second, even at f4, we're talking 100, 1/125th, down to a 60th, depending on the lighting. You're going to need a flash. Sometimes even a full flash is needed, although I try to use fill flash. What are my favorite subjects at this location? Probably my favorite subjects are first and foremost the bald eagle. Unfortunately, most of the time she is not available. The bald eagle is usually nesting about the time we have the events. I have only seen her there one time, but if she's out there, it is a special treat, believe me. You would not believe, when you get this close to raptors, you would not believe how big they really are. I mean, when you're photographing them in the wild, I don't think you get to feel for it. You don't feel their presence. When you go to an event like this, and you're literally, 6-8 feet away from them, they are immense birds. So definitely the American bald eagle. The screech owl, they have 2 really, really just cute screech owls. They've got one in a gray morph. They've got one in a red morph, and they're just one of them is imprinted, and so he makes all kind of crazy noises. But definitely a great subject. The barred owl, they have a blind barred owl there that could never be released into the wild. His name is Bob, although it's a female, so that's interesting. They have a British barn owl, which I think is just a great acting owl. He does all kind of crazy things, lots of mannerisms and so forth. And I like the Mississippi kite that they have there as well. It's a gray, it has that ghostly gray appearance. One thing about the kite, he'll come after you. Kites are kind of known to be aggressive in some cases, and I actually had him come straight at me once. He was not happy I was there. But most of the birds very relaxed around people. They're used to people. Like I said, they've been to a lot of shows. They've been to elementary schools, and I tell you what, it's just a great event to go to. You get to meet other photographers. You get to talk shop with them. You get to find out where they're going. Other interesting places that they've been to. So you don't go there expecting this just to be some great attempt at getting birds in the wild. Although they do look very much in the wild. This is all about great portraits, great close portraits, animal behavior, getting to meet other photographers, and meeting the staff. That's all this thing's really about. They do have a flight portion, which is something that I find quite interesting. They have a flight portion. It's at the end of each day, and what they'll usually do, they'll get, one of their big stars. Like they have Beatrice, which is a very large Eurasian owl, and she'll fly from. What they'll do is they'll fly her from post to post. They have a couple perches. And they let you just sit there and shoot, and they'll go back and forth as long as she's interested in doing it. They'll go back and forth for you, and you can get some good shots. Now, it's like any kind of flight shot. The chances of getting a great shot are pretty low, and you're very close. So you can shoot this thing with a 100 millimeter lens if you wanted to. There was one guy there that was shooting slow motion of them with an iPhone, which I thought looked really, really cool. Do look into this kind of place. These raptor rehab centers, or fox rehabs, or there's any number of them. There's wolf rehabs out there. A lot of these guys, they can't be released back in the wild. Now they do release a lot into the wild, but they use these kind of events for fundraisers, and the money goes toward the raptor center and goes toward healing more birds. So you're really benefiting everyone here. The second type of place that you're going to encounter, and we have one here in North Carolina, is a breeding center. Now, breeding centers are also very important. The one I'm going to talk about is Sylvan Heights Bird Park. It's located in Scotland Neck, North Carolina. It's the breeding center part of it was established in 1989. And it's been responsible for active breeding programs for many endangered species. They're helping to repopulate species that are on the brink of extinction. Again, a very beneficial zoo, if you will. I don't want to call it a zoo, but they have a zoo portion, if you will. Basically, they have these large aviaries set up that you can walk into and photograph ducks and geese and all kinds of waterfowl there. I mean, I'll put the links to these in the show notes so you can see what I'm talking about. Great place to get, again, portraits. Ducks swimming, ducks doing mating kind of rituals. Lots of behavioral kind of things are happening. Little fights and so squabbles and so on. What you're not going to get there, you're not going to get a lot of flight opportunities. They do take off in the aviary and they can fly in there. But it's such a tight space that it's almost impossible to get a good photograph. Not saying you couldn't, but it's tough. So they have something that's a little different there. They don't have a day of photography or 3 days of photography, etc., so on. they have what's called a photo pass. And this is another thing that you're going to find as you do research on these places. And the photo pass is $30 and it lasts all year long. You do have to pay for regular admission, which I think is like 20, so you're paying 50 total, I believe, to get in here and photograph. What they allow is the photo pass allows you to get in early. You can get in an hour earlier than everyone else does, and it also gives you a key. And what this key is used for is on the outside of the aviaries, they have these little locked plexiglass windows. And you can go up there, you can unlock those windows, and they're like ports for your lenses. So you can actually stick your lens through the chain link fence and photograph. Now, what I wish they had were these ports down at ground level. Unfortunately, most of the ports are about 4 feet up, 4 or 5 feet up. So you're not gonna, in some cases, you can't get down on your belly. That's something I need to write an email to them about that. I really would suggest that they put more ports in. But again, they're catering to photographers because why? Well, they know there's a lot of photographers out there that love birds, and they're like, well, how can I use what we have here to bring in more money? And so they're thinking, I'm going to get more money from photographers so we can breed more ducks and help the duck populations. And we're thinking, great, I'll give you the $50 because I want to go in there when no one else is there and get some good shots. So, it's kind of, again, it's a win-win situation. These places are not mishandling their animals in any way. They are responsible people. They're very nice people, very helpful people. I have not had a bad experience yet at either one of these locations. So, again, highly recommend it. What kind of gear do I take to Sylvan Heights? Again, both bodies, my 7D, my 1D Mark II, my new Sigma 150 to 600, I take there because you do get, they're not always that close in this area. They're pretty big aviaries, and so you need some pretty long glass in this case. I take my Tamron 70 to 300 with me just in case I need to use it for some closer shots. I do take my flash with me. I use it in the darker aviaries, and they have another location called the landing zone, which allows you to photograph some other interesting birds like parakeets and parrots and stuff like that. So you can go in there and use flash in there. Definitely, again, lots of CF cards. I usually run out by noon, so definitely take a lot of cards with you. Some of my favorite subjects there, they have some really great looking flamingos. I mean, American flamingos. I mean, just really nice looking species, well taken care of. Beautiful plumage. I like the wood duck there. I like the mergansers, and I like the crested cerema, or I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but they're these little wading birds. They're from South America, and that's another great tip I want to leave you here with is these locations give you a great opportunity to photograph species you would never get to see. I mean, yeah, you might get down to South America sometime to photograph these birds. You might get down the tip of Florida sometimes to photograph these birds. But I can guarantee you that a lot of these, especially the African species, you're probably never going to photograph. So, definitely use these places. They're there. They're easy to get to, easy to get in and out of, easy to photograph. They want you there. It's just a win-win for everybody. The third type of captive areas are zoos. Now, as I mentioned earlier, to me, there's two types of zoos. There's probably three types, but let's just stick with two. There's the quality zoo, which is a zoo that has biologists on staff. They're interested in the animals' health, welfare. They have breeding programs. They have research going on, biology research, and so on. These are high-quality zoos and ones that I recommend. course, there's the other kind of zoo, which I call tourist trap zoos, where you're driving along the road and all of a sudden you see this sign that says "Zoo next left," and you go in there and it's like 10 cages and they're about 3 foot by 3 foot cages, and this poor bird is sitting in there thinking, "Man, I wished I was dead," basically. So I'm not talking about the latter. I'm talking about a quality zoo. Now, here in North Carolina, we have the North Carolina Zoo, probably the best zoo I've ever seen. Definitely the best zoo as far as animal care that I've seen. And the other thing I really like about the North Carolina Zoo, and this is something that I really encourage you to do in your research, don't go to a zoo that's not photography friendly or photographer friendly. Don't go to a zoo that, one, doesn't let you take a tripod in, and two, says you cannot use these pictures to sell. Because to me, what they're saying is, we don't want photographers here. Okay, if those two things are on their about page or things you need to know page, just check them right off. I don't care how good of animals they have. Do not support a zoo that does not support photography, because that's just stupid. They have these silly rules that just irritate me to no end. If they want my business, and they will get my business, they're going to have to at least allow tripods and free use of photographs. So the North Carolina Zoo is located in Asheboro, North Carolina. It has these vast open habitats, like I've described earlier. Let me go into a little bit more detail about that. There's an area in there near the African Pavilion. And if you walk out back of the African Pavilion, you would think you were in the Sahara, or not the Sahara, what am I thinking? You would think you were on an African plain. You would think you were out there looking out across a vast plain, and they've got all kinds of antelope type African animals out there. They're so far away sometimes you can't even see them with the naked eye. I mean, it's just like there's this little blob out there in the distance. That's how big of an enclosure we're talking about. The animals can run. They can run at full bore if they want to. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. Do they have some small enclosures? Yes, they do. I think they're working on that. I think they're trying to get less of that, more realism, more comfort for the animals. But they do have some of the smaller areas, but again, extremely well taken care of. Many of the animals go into a better area at nighttime than during the day. So, this is one of these things where a lot of people are going to say, I'm sorry, I just don't agree with zoos. Well, and that's fine. I'm not going to argue that point. The zoo thing is completely up to you. Now, with the rehab centers in Sylvan Heights, yeah, let's talk about that in a little bit. I want to talk about that in a separate little segment here. So, what's a typical day like at the Asheboro Zoo for a photographer? You're going to want to do a little bit of research. The park is divided up into two separate areas. One is called Africa, and one is called North America. And what you're going to do, you're going to decide ahead of time which species that you want to photograph. So let's say I'm going to the zoo and I want to photograph elk and bison. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drive into North America parking lot. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to take a tram. Well, actually, I don't even think you need to take a tram. If I'm thinking about this right, you just go in through the main gate and just go to the North American portion. On down the trail, you'd find the elk. If I was going to want to photograph the elephants, then I would come in through the African side of things. And the reason I say that you need to do that is because this is a big zoo. It is a long zoo. If you're not used to walking with a lot of gear, like a tripod and a big lens and 2 cameras and so on, you definitely want to know where you're going ahead of time in this park. That's how big it is. So what are some of my favorite subjects? I really like the elk and bison exhibit. It's a good exhibit. again, the animals have a lot of free range there, and so it's hit and miss. Sometimes you go there and the animals are close enough to photograph, sometimes they're too far away. But the habitat is so good that you can actually get shots that look like they were taken in the wild. I mean, I'm talking about distant photographs. I'm talking about environmental shots. And that's just something you can't do at a lot of zoos. I like the black bear exhibit, although it's small. I wish it was a little bigger for the poor guys, but I like the black bear exhibit. I like the grizzly exhibit. I like another really good one is the baboon exhibit. If you can get there after, sometime in the spring after they've had their young, you can get some great shots in there. I guarantee you that much. So that's the whole zoo captive animal thing. Now I'm gonna open up a can of worms here. And if anybody that knows me knows I'm not afraid to open up a can of worms. So let's get into the whole wild and free versus captive discussion. I once was surfing YouTube one day, and I came across a fellow out there that was, I can't even remember his name now. He was a professional photographer, a wildlife photographer. He was on a morning show. It was a recording of a morning show. I don't know where it was, somewhere in the United States. And they were discussing his photography, of course. And everything was going great. I was really enjoying the program. And then he started getting into his philosophy. And he said, all of my photographs are of wild and free animals. And that's what I believe that everything should be, of wild and free animals. And I got to thinking about that, and I thought, you know what? I love to take photographs in the wild. I absolutely love it. I love the fresh air. I love the atmosphere. I love the challenge. But I don't think any more of that animal than I do an animal at a rehab center. To me, that was just a very bigoted statement. And I don't know, maybe I'm just going off the deep end here. And if I am, just, forgive me for that. But I think we got to get past this whole idea that, as wildlife photographers, every photograph we take has to be of an animal in the wild. And when I say in the wild, I mean like in his natural habitat. Now, if you're doing it because if you're a wildlife photographer and you're only shooting in the wild because that's just what you prefer to do, I have no problem with that whatsoever. I prefer to do it myself. But to go around on the internet and just berate other people for photographing captive animals, I just don't understand that. I don't understand that attitude. As I've already demonstrated in this episode, there are places out there that have captive animals that are captive for a very good reason. Not just because somebody decided they wanted to set up a cage and pay people to come by and look at this bird or look at this tiger. There are places like Sylvan Heights, like the Carolina Raptor Center, that are saving birds. They're saving them. They're saving birds. They're not just opening the doors for the general public to come in and wow, look at this merganser that we have. Isn't it pretty? Now pay me $20 and get out of here. That's not their goal. Their goal is to show you these birds that they have that will never be able to go into the wild again. And hopefully pull at your heartstrings. Hopefully make you stop and think, wow, these are living creatures that God made. I need to preserve these animals. I don't need to just look at them and think, oh, it's a bird. Oh, that's just a bird. Yeah, it's a bird. It's an animal. It's not a human. But these people are doing great work, and I think it is a disservice to biology, to all the study that we've done and help that we've given animals, to say that if I take a photograph of an owl in captivity, well, that's not really wildlife. That's not really wildlife photography. I'm sorry, it is. By definition, it is. It's a wild animal. A bird that's in the Carolina Raptor Center is still a wild animal. This is an animal that could attack you. It's an animal that is not, it may be more used to humans, but it could still do damage. It could pluck your eye out if it wanted to. So we're not talking about just a tame bird. We're talking about a bird that is still wild, that can't be released. So I just want to throw that out there. I want to throw that because that's something that really kind of rubs me the wrong way. And I would say probably, if I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say probably 75% of what I do is of wild animals in the wild. And probably 25%, give or take, is captive. And I love to do both. You know why? Because I love animals. It's got nothing to do with me. It's got nothing to do with I'm going to lay on my belly for 3 days and wait for this bird to show up. That's not what I'm in it for. I'm in it because I like animals. I'm not in it because I want to be a great weight hunter or, be listed as the top National Geographic photographer. I'm not really in it for that. Would it be cool to be that? Maybe. I don't know, but anyway, I'm rambling. I just wanted to throw that out there. I really want you to think about that for a minute. Before you go out there on the internet and berate somebody else or have, get really negative with somebody that is a zoo photographer. Stop and think about it for a minute. You got to understand that there's a lot more to this than just. There's more than meets the eye. That's all I'm saying. Okay, let's move on. So welcome to the Know Your Subject segment of the podcast. For those that have listened before, you know that this segment is about taking one animal species. We discuss how the animal behaves and how you can use this information to make you a better wildlife photographer. Again, I truly believe that in order to be a better wildlife photographer, we must know the subject, and we must know what to expect from the subject. The sound you just heard was that of the Anhinga. According to Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the Anhinga is also known as a water turkey or snakebird. Anhingas live in shallow, slow-moving, sheltered waters and use nearby perches and banks for drying and sunning. It's rarely found out of fresh water, except during severe droughts. The Anhinga dives from the surface of the water, swims slowly underwater, stalking fish around submerged vegetation. Its diet consists of many small to medium-sized wetland fishes, with very small amounts of crustaceans and invertebrates. Anhingas typically spear fish through their sides with a rapid thrust of their partially open bill. Alright, so, how do we photograph or how do we find the Anhinga? In America, the Anhinga is found generally in Florida. This is where I have run into them. They are a very interesting bird to me. They're actually, I don't know, I have a thing for birds that look different or have interesting features. And the Anhinga definitely fills that role. He has a long neck, and the reason he has a long neck is twofold. One, he uses it to spear with, so he can get a pretty good springing action with that neck. And two, he uses it as a snorkel, because the Anhinga does not have oil in its feathers like a duck would. So, when a diving duck goes under, he is constantly being pulled back up to the surface because of air in his lungs and the oil in his feathers. He's constantly trying to float. The Anhinga, on the other hand, when he dives down, his wings become more waterlogged, and they help add to his weight so he can stay under longer. So when he comes up out of the water and is trying to swim back to shore, what you'll see is just his head sticking out. It looks like a submarine periscope. And so because of that, he's also called a snake bird. I think it's in Europe they call him a snake bird. So it's kind of just a curious and interesting thing. So right away I'm attracted to that, right? Because it's weird. I mean, I'm attracted to weird animals. The other thing that's really interesting about them is they have really long bills. They have a long yellow bill that they spearfish with. And usually they'll spear them with both top and bottom parts of their bill. So they'll spear right through them. The other thing I find interesting about them is they're not as afraid of humans. At least the ones that I've encountered are quite friendly toward humans. I don't want to say friendly, tolerant of humans. And you can get some great shots of them. Particularly, you'll see a lot of shots taken of them drying their wings. So what they do is after they get out of the water, they'll hop up on a branch of a mangrove tree or something like that. And they'll actually dry their wings. They'll actually spread their wings out kind of like you'd see a vulture do. And they'll just sit there in the sun until their wings are dry. And then once they're dry, they'll either fly somewhere else or go back in the water and try to hunt some more. But a very cool bird. On the Merritt Island episode is where you saw I ran into a lot of them down there at the Merritt Island, Florida area. And really cool. I hope to see some more. I'm going back down to Florida here about another month and a half, I guess. I'll be going back to Florida for some more bird photography. Sadly, that brings us to the end of another episode. I want to leave you with this quote from Ansel Adams. He stated, "To the complaint, 'There are no people in these photographs,' I respond, 'There are always two people, the photographer and the viewer.'" Thanks for listening. Make it a great day, and get out there and enjoy nature. Bye-bye. Music for this episode was provided by Dr. Turtle.